Morning and good afternoon, actually, everyone. And thanks for having invited me for this session. And I really hope it's going to be fruitful for everyone. I would like to ask just briefly to my fellow coordinator back in Pakistan, how do we want to handle questions and an eventual discussion? Do we do it during my presentation? Do you want to collect questions for the end? How do you prefer to do this before I start?
Okay, thank you. Actually, we will take the question in a chat session. So everyone who is listening is interested to ask some questions, some comments. During the presentation, they can type in the chat. And here we will collect all these questions, and then at the end of your presentation, we will discuss them.
Fantastic. Thank you very
all the
much.
audience, you are requested if you have some question, so you can type during the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's dive into our subject of today straight away. So my name is Alberto Saccavini. I work for Blumine. It is an Italian consultancy firm specialized in sustainability in the fashion industry. That means along the entire supply chain of the fashion industry. Beside that, I am also teaching at the Milan Polytechnic at the fashion design faculty, and I'm teaching sustainability at the students of fashion design. So this is me. I have more than 10 years experience in this field, and I'm very pleased today to give you this presentation. Let me try with this with a mouse. Let's see what I could do. There we go. Okay, let's try to put a little bit things into perspective. Let's talk about our supply chain, the supply chain of our industry. It's not very dissimilar from any other industry, of course. I mean, this is a level in where industry comes as a typical industry. So we can say that while we have the official definition of what a supply chain, no, it is all the steps and all the processes and all the people somehow that are involved in the creation, the design, and the production of and the distribution of a commodity. So we have here a small representation of this that gives us already a hint that our dictionary definition of supply chain is actually missing something in today's world. Here, yes, we are talking about the retail at the very end of this image that arrives to the consumer. But as you have seen on the other side of the slide, I have added an extra 2 steps in what our supply chain today, especially in the fashion industry, should look like. So we are missing the use phase, and what I always have difficulties to call nowadays, that here I have described as dispose. So when the consumer decides that it doesn't need anymore the good that he has purchased in the retail phase. So let's not forget, when we talk about the supply chain, that beside having a material, creating the product, selling the product, we need to use the product and do something at the end of his life. Okay, so this is why today a more correct representation of the fashion supply chain should look like a little bit like this. Where we have an input that is fiber, either synthetic or natural, and then we will see a bit more in detail also this. Then we have the creation of the yarn first, and then the textile or the knit product. Then we have the physical creation of the garment itself, so the manufacturing phase, the garment making, then to arrive to a distribution, the retail, as we said before, the consumer, and then one of the complicated phases comes into the play. That is landfilling, and where this stuff goes back to our center, that is a graphic representation of the Earth, or where is it going? So looking at this representation, let's try to detail a little bit more. This different other way of representing the supply chain. The slide is a little bit blurred, so I'm not interested in what is written in every little square of this image, but I'm more interested in making you aware that this is the graphic representation of each single step that the cotton harvested in the field in the top left of our image. All the different steps and movements, because you can see there are a lot of little red trucks in our image on our road, and all the steps that they have to make to reach the final step in this representation, that is the consumer purchasing a pair of trousers. It's a pair of chinos made in cotton, and these are all the steps, but actually these are not all the steps of the trousers. These are all the steps of that very cotton only, because as you know, a pair of trousers is not made only of the material of the main fabric. We would need to add different other components from zipper, button, to the sewing yarn even, or the fabric of the pocket that is a different fabric from the main fabric, for example, and so on and so forth. So actually this is not the entire supply chain of those trousers, but this is a supply chain of the cotton. There is a small step in the middle, is the fifth, sixth blue square that is sew garment, is written there. Then that's the step where actually all the other different supply chains would join this road in the creation of this garment. So what do I want to show with this image? This supply chain of fashion is far more complicated, fragmented, and long compared to many other supply chains. Actually, if we take a complex food item like a biscuit, a sweet biscuit, we know that probably with the 5 steps, we can easily, or actually we are overcomplicating probably, if we say that with 5 steps, we go from the wheat field to the shelf of our shop. We harvest the wheat, we grain it into flour, we cook the flour together with other elements into a biscuit. We do a couple of steps of logistics of these biscuits. Let's make it complicated. And then the biscuit reaches the shelf. And this is not overcomplicating the fashion supply chain. This is a very reasonable representation of the supply chain. And as I was saying before, there are a lot of small trucks that they represent that these steps very often are not made by the same company, but there is a change of location. And as you well know, some of these changes of location, they are not done by a truck. They are done by plane, by boat, because very often we are moving fashion goods or wannabe fashion goods, things that will become fashion goods from one side to the other of the world even. So a lot of layers of complication in this. In this image, that is a bit confusing, but it's interesting because it wants to start to put in red, compared to our previous image of the global fashion industry, which are the issues that can be linked to the different phases. And this is a little bit what we will try to do today, try to understand where the gaps and the challenges for sustainability they lie along our supply chain. Okay, we can look at some of them, you know, wherever a large workforce is needed, for example, that is in the garment making, but of course in the production of the fiber, but as well in the creation of the textile, where of course the higher the number of human beings involved in an operation, the higher the risks of human rights abuse, workforce abuse, labor rights not respected. It's growing, you know, it's even statistically is like this. Unfortunately, we know so many cases where this is actually the reality. On the other hand, we have as input materials our fossil fuel for our synthetic materials, our natural materials. On the other hand, that they have other issues more linked to the agricultural exercise. That means synthetic fertilizers and pesticides need for the growing of our material, the water and land use that are problematic. Then we're moving along our supply chain, and we have other issues that are coming to our hand. We have, of course, the problems of distribution and of retail and of just a simple example, you know, the fact that whenever a garment is ready, we pack it in a plastic bag, and then we put it all together with many others into a box, and then we try to distribute it. And then probably when it goes to the warehouse, we remove that plastic bag to put it in another plastic bag. And the amount of plastic bags in this logistical exercise, it's growing. Then, of course, we go to towards the end of our what is already becoming a cycle, but you know exactly where I want to arrive at the end of this discourse. We arrive to the consumer, and here it writes, shop less, wear less, shop lots, wear less. This is probably the main issue today when we arrive at the consumer. But on the other hand, you know, we are the industry, so we need them to buy things. So how do we juggle these two things together when we are looking at our supply chain? And then, of course, there is the landfilling bit, where what do we do with all these resources? Is there a way to do? But let's try to look things a little bit more in perspective. Here you can see that here what they want to represent with this image. We are a little bit talking about the similar thing to the previous one, but this is a representation done by the Global Compact, by the United Nations, together with the consultancy. So they want to represent that actually the environment is involving each and every phase of our supply chain. And at the same time, in the large majority, actually I would say in any of the phases, also the human beings are involved in a way or another as first actors, because they are actually physically doing this action, or they are actually receiving the consequences of this action, of this phase. But I would like to try to simplify a little bit this image. Let me then I don't know. No, let's stay here. And unfortunately, I don't have the presenter's view, so I don't have the following slide because I thought there was another slide here, but it's okay, no worries. To try to simplify a little bit, let's imagine that our supply chain has got the 4 main phases. You know, we have a sourcing exercise, we have the making, we have the use, and then we have the dispose. We know that each of these phases is actually influenced by something and someone, especially all around us. So we have one cycle that influences each of our phases, and we know it very well. That is the law. There is a legal system, either in our country, either in the country where we want to sell things, that obliges us to think and take in consideration a lot of different issues, and many of them very strongly linked to sustainability. I'll give you one example linked to the marketing of goods. As you probably know, well, as you know, to sell goods in the United States of America, you need to follow certain rules. But if you actually want to sell that very good, not in the US per se, but in California, well, then from a chemical point of view, so from the restrictions on the use of certain chemicals and actually the presence of certain chemicals on the end product, you need to follow a specific law called Proposition 65 that is typical or actually unique to that very country of the United States. To arrive to fulfill that very law, well, you need to have a proactive, responsible approach to chemistry, sustainable chemistry, so-called. Okay, so that means that the attention to sustainability is actually somehow imposed by the law that is not even the law of the country where you are actually producing the good, but is of the country where you want to sell the good. So this to say how much the legal system, the global legal system translated into the local ones, is actually influencing our way of producing things. Then what else is influencing us? Well, of course, or more than what is influence, it's what could influence very strongly. Well, when we talk about sustainability, we know that we are actually talking about choices. I can choose to sell in California or not, okay, for example, or I can choose to use a specific material or not. And this is another, but who is actually making all these choices? Well, somehow a strong and extremely important role is in the hands of the designers or of the design team, product and the design. Because they have a lot of choices that can be made either on how the product is made itself, how it is designed, the choices of the fabric, the choices of where the garment will be produced, for example, but as well on how the consumer will use it. There is a lot that the designer can actually work towards this. But actually the design can also already embed in the product what to do at the end of it. And this is another crucial point for me. Then I have added an extra layer external to the designer that is actually the brand. Why am I putting the brand on top? Just one simple example. Alessandro Michele just been not working anymore for Gucci, or let's say been fired from the company. Well, that means that designer is not the owner of the company. I'm talking about in general cases or large brands and large corporations. Of course, there is often the brand and the designer that coincide. But when we are becoming a little bit bigger, we know that the design is actually responding to what the brand is deciding. If we take the example of Gucci, not of Gucci, but of Kering, we know that the attention to sustainability of Kering is very strong, is very important, is very in forefront when they are talking to their investors, to their consumers. What does it mean? It means that the brand takes certain decisions to have invented and signed the Fashion Pact in Biarritz in 2019 under the invite of the French government to create the Fashion Pact itself. The decision of decarbonizing a little bit the supply chain has been taken by the brand, and the design, well, has to follow. The designer has to do what the owner of the company will say, even though he's doing the design, but it's not really entirely there. So, but let's move on. Then we have another two groups of that can influence some of the phases in this case. So we have the consumers that, of course, they will influence very strongly the use phase, because they will decide how long, how many times they will use the things, how they will wash them, how they will dry their clothes. But of course, they will influence also the dispose, the last phase of our supply chain. Because let's imagine a recycling system put in place for a specific good, but the recycling will never happen if the consumer will not decide to recycle it. The things will not get recycled on their own. Yes, okay, we can say that we can find in between all the rubbish, all the garments. Very complicated. We are managing to do it with the metal parts, because with the magnet we can remove the metal parts, but it will be extremely complicated to do it with textiles, for example. Then we have the retail phase that, of course, they have a role to play in both the use phase and also in the dispose phase, because they have a direct connection with the consumer. Okay, it can be a connection that is a spot connection, but it can be even more on the long term. But let's move on and let's add some other layers that will show us which are actually the how to say, the hotspots of sustainability today, to this layer that to our supply chain that we have already highlighted. So there are 5 main topics that are the 5 inner bubbles that you can see there. So safe chemistry, human and labor rights, circular economy, climate change, biodiversity conservation. As you can see, each of these, they are partially or entirely being influenced by the different phases that we have in our supply chain, our 4 main phases. So let's look at, safe chemistry. Of course, it is crucial. It is a very well-known subject today, because we know very well it is since ever has been important, but more than ever since 2012, when the Greenpeace detox campaign started. The attention to chemistry has grown dramatically, but also the steps that the fashion supply chain has made in this direction as very important and very crucial. Human and labor rights, we were saying already before, a lot of human beings involved in many of these operations, especially in the making. When we have a lot of people, we need to pay extra attention to both the human rights and labor rights. We have these issues at all levels, but we know about the issues at the source level because we all know the news story of the cotton production put under the scrutiny of human and labor rights in a specific region of China. And some brands and nations starting to say, we would like not to receive cotton from that side of the world. But that's a complicated issue because we know that the Xinjiang region in China, that is the one under scrutiny for labor rights abuse, is actually producing 20% of the cotton of the world. So what do? You know, we have a problem. If we don't want that, we have a 20% of the cotton production that we need to replace somehow, somewhat. This is just to give an example. You know, of course, in the making phase, this is getting even more complicated. I don't want to even. Let me just mention. And I will end here the talk, the Rana Plaza collapsing, the building in Dhaka in 2014. But this is just the last and one of the major disasters, human disasters of our industry. We know that today we cannot talk about sustainability in fashion without talking about circularity and circular economy. And this is a crucial point, and that is going to influence all our phases. Even more than circular economy today, climate action is the front runner of all the declarations and the exercise towards a more sustainable fashion supply chain for most of the brands, but not only. Biodiversity conservation, it's parallel to many of these. It talks a lot about the sourcing, but also about the dispose phase of our supply chain. I have added on top of both these, of all these 5 hot topics, let's call them, one major subject that today is becoming probably the most important one on top of all this, that is transparency and traceability. What we were saying before about cotton cannot be done without a traceability system, or that needs to be linked to transparency. There is no transparency without traceability, and vice versa. But on top of all this, even more, and even more under the scrutiny in these very last months, there is the fact of having available, verifiable data for our declarations. You probably all know the fact that Norway and the Netherlands, so 2 countries in the northern part of Europe, has requested to those brands using the Higg index labeling system on the final product not to use it anymore, because those 2 governments, they are not really convinced of the data that are lying behind the Higg index, or actually this part of the Higg index, that is very much based on the sourcing phase for that very labeling system. But anyway, so we have 5 hotspots of sustainability, so safe chemistry, human and labor rights, so one social thing, one thing about chemistry, the circularity issue, one thing that is linked 100% to nature, that is biodiversity conservation, climate action as well, very much linked to our planet, and overall subjects on the international discourse on sustainability. And on the other hand, we have the traceability and transparency issue that covers the entire spectrum of all these things, and of course the need of verifiable data for continuing. These are our 5 subjects that we were mentioning before, that they all need to have in their center, in their core, a sustainability management system. So a system that will help us to understand what to do with each, or what are we actually doing in each of these subjects. As you can see, beside the 5 themes, I have put some other little squares that are very easy to recognize because they are picked directly from the Sustainable Development Goals. What do I want to say with this? You know, of course, to the circularity issue, we can link to specific Sustainable Development Goals. Same thing with biodiversity, with climate action. There is actually the number 13 Sustainable SDG is called climate action itself. What do I want to say with this? That actually there are a lot of policies and politics that are very much linked to our subjects. That means to the actions that the supply chain must take and undergo. There are many at different levels. We just mentioned the SDGs of the United Nations, the Sustainable Development Goals, that in this last review, we are carrying over these SDGs with different names or different logos since already quite a while, but only in this latest revision where they got this name of SDGs, they are not dedicated exclusively to governments. They have been thought and created to be a tool for a country to assess themselves and their policies towards the goals, previously called Millennium Development Goals and so on and so forth. In this last revision, they have expressly looked in the possibility for companies, for industries to use these goals as a tool for measuring somehow their progress towards sustainable development. Okay, but then we have other policies, a bit more private policies, let's call them, but not necessarily, because we have the policies that have been imposed to many companies, chosen by many brands, of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. We just mentioned the IG index, and I'm sure that any of you working in the industry and those studying it, they know very well all the different tools of the IG index. Then there are other aspects, other ways. So we have the Global Fashion Agenda that with their, especially with the CEO agenda, here you have the logo of the 2022 one, that they call the long view. That means already something specific, that they want to look at the long term of their activities. So the CEO agenda wants to highlight which are the directions that the CEOs need to take into account when designing the policies and the future of their brands. We mentioned already the Fashion Pact that was signed during by the first companies, was signed in France at Biarritz during the 2019 G7, and was designed practically by the Kering Group with the support of the French government, and they have decided to take as a priority for their sustainability policies specific subjects, let's say teams, trying to give to themselves some objectives, because we have seen before, if we don't have data, verifiable data, you need to know where you want to go. You want to reach a specific objective, and so you can set your KPIs, and so you can have your data to be able to say, yes, I made this, and this is how I made it, and this is how you can check that it's true that I made it. Okay? But probably the biggest step in the policy framework in the supply chain of fashion towards sustainability is within the European Green Deal, and especially the Circular Economy Action Plan, and even more specifically with the Strategy for Sustainable and Circular Textile that has been issued, what was it, last year, 2020? No, this summer, I don't remember. Well, it's very new. And it is a strategy, of course, it's not yet a regulation, but it shows very clearly the direction where the European Union wants to go when talking about these things. Okay? Don't even need to talk about this, but I find it very interesting always the adding of recycle as not the aim of the end result that we would like to have when we think about circularity in the supply chain. This is a small image that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that, as you know, is one of the most important think tanks in the direction of sustainability, especially of circularity. And they always say, yes, recycle is good, but look, that recycle itself doesn't create loops or doesn't create a loop. Creates some cycles, of course, but this is not the very end. The very end is to actually avoid the bin at the very end of the thing. So when we are thinking about circularity in that way, we often say that we need to shift the system, to shift where? Design out waste and pollution, for example, keep products and material in use longer, for longer periods. And of course, we need to regenerate our natural systems. So these three blocks are actually those that need to lead the change in the way of thinking, even the entire system. So when talking about circularity, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation always talk about 4 or 5 R. Reuse, recycle, or something, blah, blah, blah. And the last one is always rethink. So rethink the entire system. That means thinking out of the block, of the box, if you want to put it more clearly. But this is the point. We need to move, in certain cases, we need to move away from what we are used to. So from what becomes easy, from the everyday way of doing things. So these are just suggestions, of course. Probably also you have seen, you are familiar with this representation of circularity. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, creating this image, they have thought about 2 cycles, 2 main aspects. We have technical materials on one side and biological materials on the other. The objective is try to create as many loops as possible at different level, at production level, down to the user level. But actually, what is important here is not the loops. Yeah, the loops, yeah, we have to invent things, but that's what we do, you know, the industry invent things, create things. So that for me is not the issue. The issue is the bottom part of this image, is to be able to minimize the leakages of our system towards energy recovery, and landfilling. So the entire exercise is not actually to create the loops, is to avoid the leakages of our systems, because our system as used to be not in nature, you know, the biological systems, you know, if we look at agriculture or how can I say, the agriculture of our grandfathers, or even no need to go back 2 or 3 generations, maybe one is enough. It was made out of small loops. It was very, very little that was leaking out of this system. Well, the industrial, so the technical materials one is a bit more complicated, especially from when we invented synthetic materials and the synthesis of things. But this is the point, you know, what we need to do is to try to minimize the leakages and reduce the amount of stuff that goes out of this system. So when discussing the issue of sustainability, we always hear, you know, these 3 main things. When we talk about the what, where, who, and how, you know, basic questions in each of the phases, actions, and policies that we have on our supply chain, we need to think about people, profit, and planet, the 3 Ps. We need to think about the human beings. We need to think about the planet, but we need to think about the profit as well. What does it mean? I can create the most sustainably, environmentally sustainable product. I can create the most human-friendly product. But if this product is, we're talking about fashion industry here, if we are talking about something that is not usable by the consumer, and it means that it doesn't sell or is ugly, as simple as that, is that people don't like it, and so they are not purchasing it. The fact that is sustainable from a planet or a people point of view is empty, okay? Because we need to have our sustainability as a connection of these 3 aspects. Actually, as you can see, this image is missing something. I always add a 4th leg that I call culture, because we need to add also the history and the actual situation of the human beings that are involved. Let me do a simple example. As you probably have heard in this last couple of years, there has been a lot of talking about the alpaca wool issue, because there has been a couple of reports that were actually saying that in some of the farms where the alpaca is grown in the Andes in South America, in the mountains, the animals have been treated very badly, and the hair have been removed in a very harsh way, creating problems and damages to the animals themselves. So the animals were treated very badly. And we know it is one of a major issue when we talk about animal-derived fibers, because we have the same issue with the merino wool and the mulesing problem from Australia mainly. So what did happen to the alpaca market lately? Well, that has dropped down dramatically. And what is the consequence? Yeah, you know, we have tackled one of the checked one of the boxes in our sustainability list. That is the one animal friendly, to be animal friendly, or in translating in our previous 5 main themes, we can say we have done something towards biodiversity conservation. But is this all the story? What do we do with all those hundreds, thousands, of farmers that are actually having alpaca wool as their first income. Is it the solution not to use alpaca? Or is it the solution is let's teach them how to do things in a better way from our perspective? Let's say, let's keep them in their own culture, saving our culture, because our culture says let's not treat bad animals. And that's correct. Not saying it's not correct. Their culture is let's graze these animals to have the wool to sell for our income. So both these aspects that are cultural aspects need to be taken into consideration. That create the entire spectrum of what we need to think about when we talk about sustainability. And of course, only where all four of these aspects merge, then we have our sustainability. Okay, this is another representation. I don't know if you move with the mouse, I can do it as well. Yeah, okay. Tract. Sorry, just because it was covering the image, at least on my screen. I don't know if it does it the same on yours, sorry. So the textile and environment, the European Environmental Agency has designed this this infographic to try to understand the role of the design in the circular economy, in the sense which are the decisions and where the decisions of the design are actually lying along the different aspects of the supply chain, made in vertical in our different steps, and taking into consideration two aspects: slowing down the loops, so what is being called slowing down the fashion system, or actually trying to think about the lifespan of a good, and of course closing the loop. But closing the loop is a bit already heard, so it's a bit easier to understand. So when we are talking about, for example, the product design, when we are talking about repairability, we are not talking about closing the loop. We are talking about slowing down the loop because we are extending the lifespan of a product, for example. So it's very interesting how they have managed to standardize and put into boxes the different ways of working of the different actors, the model, the product design, the consumer behavior, and the policies into the different aspects. Okay, so we know that on the repairability and the recyclability, for example, I can do a lot at the design phase, but if the consumer doesn't take care of his own products in a certain way, or if they don't go towards recycling at the end, the product will not be recycled. And of course, also at the policy level, I can do a lot, because I can, well, force the designer to use recycled material. So I have a percentage of mandatory recycled content is written there. This is a very interesting thing. Or I can spend money in educating the consumer to recycle, or give them the clear information of what to do. There is a lot of talking. All this comes because the European Union has decided to impose the recycling of used clothes in the entire European region, and to create a system that is based That is very similar to the systems that they already exist for other products, for plastic products, for paper, glass, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of talking because of this, and which are the levels and which are the actions that can be involved in all this. Okay. Let's move it. Sorry, because otherwise I don't see. But let's try to analyze a little bit our four main phases, the source, make, use, and dispose. So we know that for sourcing things, in the sourcing phase, we need resources. Where do we get these resources? The dichotomy, the usual dichotomy between natural and synthetic will be always there. Even though my starting point when I have to reflect on this, when a brand comes to me, it comes not to the professor but to the consultant at that stage, should I use cotton or polyester? The question is always, I have no idea if you don't tell me what you want to do. Does it make sense to talk about cotton versus polyester? I don't know. It depends, really depends a lot on the garment that I am creating, because the two materials will behave in a completely different way. Here in Italy is winter, it's quite cold. We had a 4 days break because of public holidays in this last day, and I was in the mountains, and there was a lot of snow, and it was very cold. Of course, I wear polyester underwear. That's the best you can do. Very light, very simple. It washes very quickly. It dries very quickly. So little water, little energy. So not easy to have a clear decision on which resource would be the best for what I need to do. Of course, there are options there. Then we have another dichotomy. I have put a couple of dichotomies here. So local versus distant. This is another complicated issue because we have, for many markets, we have textile industry that can be localized. Italy, but Pakistan as well. They have their own local industry, textile industry that can reach the local market as well. We can produce garments almost entirely, for a couple of specific cases, also from the fiber in Italy, and to have the entire supply chain that happens in a few hundred kilometers. If we think about the polyamide of the Radici group that is located in the north of Italy, we can say that in 100 kilometers you could actually do everything, from the production of the fiber to the recycling of the end of life garment, because they recycle their own polyamide. But this is just a silly example, but if in Italy we want to create a cotton garment, then we have to deal in our sustainability thinking with the fact that this cotton will come from far away. Again, we have a choice. We can decide what to do. Then we go to the third one, that is abundance versus scarce. Scarce, or actually small scale, would be better to be said. With what we want to deal with. Do we want to deal with the big players, with the polyester and cotton, or do we want to deal with broom fiber? Is a bast fiber, but it's very exists very little around the world. Or again, we were saying before, the alpaca or the guanaco, that is one kind of alpaca that was actually saved by Loro Piana, wool producer, because they have found it is even finer and softer than alpaca is. And it is one of the most expensive fibers in the world, but the production is very, very, very limited. Anyway, again, also in this case, we have choices. Then we have one of the most famous ones. We have innovation towards tradition. That, as you well know, they are not necessarily one against the other, but they can actually work together very strongly because they can be integrated one into the other. Let's again talk about the cotton industry. We know very well that the cotton that we made even just 50 years ago is not the cotton that we are making now. Where with cotton, I mean yarn and textiles. Otherwise, we are sitting at the Italian Machinery Production Association, so we know very well that the innovation in technology is helping also traditional products and traditional, how to say, materials. Of course, we need to take into consideration water, energy, and CO2 emissions. We know we're talking about resources, and we know that the resources that we need is not only the material itself, but is those other resources that are needed to create, to maintain, and to use and to dispose of all this. Then we have if we have said that chemistry, it is an hotspot, we have not to forget the chemistry in primary sector, because for the production of natural fibers, we know that chemistry plays a very important role, and is not necessarily the chemistry, and is a very different chemistry from the one of the dyeing and the ennobling phases. So chemistry all along the supply chain, starting from the sourcing. Of course, synthetics are made of chemistry, out of chemistry. I'm not against chemistry, let's be very clear. I'm very much in favor, we need it, but needs to be thought of, needs to be responsible chemistry. We mentioned already a couple of times the human intensity. Human intensity also in this phase is important. The use of, in the cotton production, we know that the use of a lot of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, it is and it's not the only threat to the human beings and to biodiversity, just to move to the following step. Then we have land issues. But the biodiversity issue is very much linked to how much trees are we cutting down for making our viscoses, for example. The land issues are, again, another complicated aspect. We know that if we increase the quantity of natural fibers that we want to produce, we need to have more land. But we are already struggling with the amount of land that we need for the food industry. So what do we do? Do we all wear cotton garments and eat nothing, or we wear a blend of different fibers, keeping our cotton production at this level and continue to eat whatever we need to eat? This is another issue that complicates the sourcing phase. Here, just to make you, I made it on purpose, this slide so complicated, because sourcing is complicated. So which are the directions? Let's start from the bullets on the top left. We need data. We mentioned already. How can we get data from? We can get data from certifications or certain initiatives that are working on specific subjects or specific materials, for example. Then we need traceability and transparency in this. So yeah, I have laid here just a few of these certification, data initiatives, and transparency exercises in a very not clear image. It's not a very simple slide, but it reflects exactly what is going on out there. It's a disaster. Everyone says his own thing. He says things in a different way, looks at things in a different perspective. But nevertheless, I wanted to have here a couple of those who are the big players or those who are actually saying that, doing the things in a certain direction today. On the top, we have the Sustainable Apparel Coalition with the MSI, with the as part of the EEC index. I don't know if you know the history of this of the material sustainability index of the HIG. It actually starts, everything starts from a Nike exercise back in the days. It's in the beginning of the 2000s. They made an app for the phone where a designer, in their idea, would choose how to do things, what to do, what materials to use, and as a result, he would know already which would be the environmental impact of his choices. So the database and the system behind was then shared with the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and has become one of the bases of the EEC index, especially with the MSI. The issue with the MSI, I don't want to stay here telling you the story, but you can easily find a lot of literature around the issues that have been raised against the MSI of the EEC in the latest years, especially because the EEC index until December 2021 allowed you to compare fibers. So you could actually compare cotton versus polyester and see who would score best. And the reality of the EEC index or of the MSI today is that if you do this comparison, it appears that that synthetic fibers, they perform much better than any of the natural ones. Then the Sustainable Apparel Coalition started to say, no, this tool is not meant to compare fibers, different fibers. It is meant to compare the same fiber with different sustainability performances. Just to give an example, it's not cotton versus polyester, it is cotton versus recycled cotton, or polyester versus bio-based, partially bio-based polyester. This didn't save them from complicated issues, and the end of all these problems, let's call them, it is the fact that the Norwegian and the Dutch governments, they asked them to remove the labeling system on the garments for those brands who are using still this. But again, it is a tool. It's based on data. That's why the data are complicated. Just to give another example, silk is performing very badly on the EEC index, especially when it was used to compare fibers. But why is it performing so badly? Or what could be one of the reasons? The reason is that the data that were used were extremely old and extremely partial. This is a very old, long story, the issue of how LCAs are created. They are created based on data and especially on available databases. If those data are not current, it's going to be complicated to have an accurate data. But this is one of the tools that exists. Another organization that works on a larger scale on this, it is Textile Exchange, that you might know very well with their benchmark program, corporate fiber materials benchmark program. They are giving a tool to the companies to understand how they are actually performing in their fiber sourcing choices. In the years, Textile Exchange had managed to create a set of preferable fibers. They started to use this word preferred fibers quite a long ago now. And they are helping these companies to try to understand where is best to go for them according to their portfolio of fibers that they are using. It is a very interesting, it is a closed system, of course, you need to be registered, but they have a dummy version of it that is very interesting. I use it extensively with students to make them understand what is the rationale behind what are the set of data that are wanted to be used. 12:30, more or less. Okay. Then we have Google has also started to do an exercise, the Global Fiber Impact Explorer, that is on a beta phase now with some brands using it. So these are the three biggest exercises in trying to give choices to those who have to decide what to source, trying to help them with data. Then there are a lot of other organizations and certifications that are actually working on specific issues. I have put only a few just to make things clear. When we talk about cotton, we have three main directions. We have on one direction the organic cotton farming. Here we have represented the GOTS certification, for example, but it's not the only one. Then we have the direction that Better Cotton has decided to follow. That says, okay, let's not go for organic because we will never be able to produce enough cotton for everyone if we are thinking only about the organic textile cotton farming system. But let's work in a different and more holistic approach to it. So let's take best practices, geographically thought, because we know very well that growing cotton in one region is not like growing cotton in another region. And let's try to make the best out of it. So not to have the best available, the best cotton in the world, but to have a better cotton. The world is very explanatory on the way forward that they wanted to do. They joined forces in a second stage with Cotton Made in Africa that already started the process on that way of thinking. And together in Better Cotton, they added an extra step to the farming issue. That was, we need, and this is becoming even more clear in these latest months, the need of a traceability of our cotton. So we need to know that it's our cotton that is being transformed here and there. Then they had another couple of issues linked to how to make sure that the farmers would continue to go in the direction of better cotton. And so longer term contracts, fixed prices, and so on and so forth. Then we have here Masters of Linen, for example. That's another very interesting initiative of European linen producers, where with this mark they can demonstrate that the linen is not only cultivated in Europe, but is actually entirely produced in Europe. So we have Masters of Linen already on the final product that shows us that the entire product was made in Europe. Then we have the recycling world that I wanted to represent with one of the different certifications, that is the Global Recycle Standard. Global Recycle Standard and the GOTS are actually brother and sister. When the Textile Exchange sat down and decided to write the global recycle standard, they actually took physically the GOTS standard and did copy and paste GOTS with GRS. I'm joking, of course, but the rationale behind is very, very similar. Which is because the rationale of these two certification goes a bit beyond what usually we know from certifications. They are not looking only at the beginning of the supply chain, so how a material is recycled or how a cotton, for example, is grown, but they are looking also at the other steps of the supply chain. That means they are adding two specific aspects. Is a social aspect of how the workers are treated in the different steps of the supply chain of the recycled material for one and the organic material for the other. And they had a chemical aspect as well. So chemistry needs to be done in a responsible way in both these standards, and they look both at existing certification and existing standards, but got created also a list of forbidden substances on their own. Then there is one last. Okay. Okay. Just then, I would like to add one more thing on this slide, and is the canopy exercise. So canopy, it is an industry that is an organization that has decided to work on the canopies. So their idea is to work on forests for the conservation of forests. So when they started to work on this, they discovered very quickly that forests were very strongly linked to fashion. And since they have started this, the attention, or actually percentages of fabric made out of forest-derived materials, that means all the viscoses, rayon, and so on and so forth, kind of fibers, has grown dramatically. So they have created a set of information that could be collected from the viscose producers to understand how good or bad they are actually working on the supply chain. So this has been a very quick and very strong work that has been able to create a lot of buzz on this subject, making actually a lot of steps forward and giving a lot of tools to the organizations that are willing to use these materials and trying to increase the sustainability performances of these materials. Okay, so I'm very happy to take questions from your side, or continue to tell you stories about the materials and the other phases of the supply chain. So please, if there are any questions already available, I'm very happy to answer to them.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting to have this long presentation and very informative. If or from the audience you have some question, so you can type in the chat and we will discuss it quickly. I will start with one question.
Please.
What do you think? We are talking about some standards, some models from the Europeans, but when we will talk about the supply chain, most of the fashion and textile industry is from Asia or from Africa. So when you will talk about these standards or models, what do you think? Where actually we stand now? Like we have the sustainability development goals for quite few years, but still, you know better than us that we are not actually on the so what do you think where we are actually now in terms of recycling and then the next stage in terms of circularity?
Well,
We know a lot of
thanks
things
for.
are on the paper, but exactly where we are now.
We are in a stage, we are still in a very early stage of this. We are in a very early stage because, well, in general, sustainability is, how can I say, it's a bit more of a new subject for this industry, even though we are talking about since many, many years. But especially when talking about the recycling and recyclability and the will to do this in our industry, we are far behind compared to many other industries. If we look at the for example, at the car industry, they have been experimenting and working towards circularity since many, many years. Actually, today, in many of the companies are actually obliged by a lot of different regulation, national regulations, to include in their design a level of disassembly that is very high. Talking about disassembly, for example, that is one of the tools that the designer has in his hands or the producer has in his hands for facilitating circularity. We, in the fashion industry, we are far, far, far behind. Just to give you an example, you know better than me that the large majority of the fibers of the textiles that today are produced are not monomaterial. When a brand is choosing to do something on monomateriality, they are actually using it for their communication tools. And this is very, very limited actually in the market. Even a cotton t-shirt is not a cotton t-shirt because very rarely we are using a cotton sewing yarn. So our cotton t-shirt, even though it's labeled 100% cotton, we know very well that it is not. On the industrial level, where we are, very badly on the recycling of the end garment, of the garment at the end of the life, because there are still a lot of complications. We are still dealing with the hand sorting systems, and it is very difficult. Even though technologically we would be able to recycle a lot of things, today we have far more problems to separate these things from one to another. What is happening at the very high speed today, it is the pre-consumption recycling, or actually the post-industrial recycling of the fibers, for a very simple reason. We have one single step, that is the cutting phase, where we are easily able to separate, to segregate the different fibers or the different materials for composition. So if we are able to tackle that phase, that is the cutting phase, for example, and we are able to put in place a segregation system of the waste that is created at the cutting table, we know that if we are cutting, I don't know, for the denim industry, we know that that mattress is made 100% of cotton. Let's imagine that we are making cotton jeans. And so if at that moment, instead of throwing our cutting waste on the floor that is then swapped and swap away at the end of the day, we have right there separate bins for the different compositions, then this will give a huge advantage for the recycling of materials. So this is something that is happening very quickly, still on a small scale, but with a very clear image of what we need, because on one hand, we have the brands pushing and saying, we need you to create more recycled materials, for example, or materials with an increased performance on this aspect of circularity. And on the other hand, we have the difficulty of the yarn producers and of the recyclers themselves to find the materials that are suitable for their supply chain. So I hope I have answered a little bit to some of the. It would be a very long answer to your question, but I think I have spoke to.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have another question. And it is related to the price. Like if we have some recycled materials, it will be of course expensive. So they're asking how we can encourage the people to buy the expensive one instead of the normal price. Why they will pay more? How we can change the mindset of the people?
The question is it related to the industry or to the final consumer? Because I think that the answer would be different.
Final consumer. I am talking especially for the final consumer.
For the final consumer, well, the final consumer needs to know. The final consumer needs to have a clear image that let's assume that I have the same product made 100% virgin material or 100% recycled material. Let's take an example of something optimum. Assuming that, as you are saying, the price is higher, but it's not anymore the case for specific materials. In certain cases, not the case. Well, the fact that what needs to be clear to the consumer, clarified to the consumer, is that the 100% virgin material garment is costing less today. On the price tag is lower, is not the real price of that material. So that extra price, that is the environmental impact cost of that very material, will be paid either by himself, either by the generations coming after, but at the end of the day, it will be paid in a way or another. That's, to me, the consumer needs to know. That's the first thing to do, that these two things, these two white t-shirts, one is 100% recycled, the other one are organic, and the other one is conventional, they are actually not the same t-shirt at all. Those two things, they have an impact that is completely different, and has to be taken into consideration. And then the choice will be made based on that. That's what I think. And let's not forget that that this will become more and more easy, especially with these last generations of consumers. The youngsters are much more aware of things, even more than we think.
Thank you. So we have the shortage of time, so I will take the last question. When we are talking about the post-industry waste or post-consumer waste, so it is moving between different countries, like the textiles are being developed, for example, in Asia and then going to Europe. And then the second hand is coming cloth market. Second hand clothes are coming like African countries for reuse, and then it will be recycled. So what will be the issues of traceability in between the continents, in between the different countries? So it is possible to make them that actually they are being recycled, or they are being in the circular loop.
So the commercial was a little bit broken. It's about the traceability of all this.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
In between different parts of the world.
Yeah. Very, very, very clear. Well, the fact is that traceability is going to be complicated. Definitely complicated. We are talking about waste material. And when we talk about waste, no matter where you are, if you are in Italy and we call it mafia, or you are somewhere else in the world and you call it as you wish, waste and organized crime or blurred situations is going to be always there. But even removing, hypothetically, trying to remove this issue from the equation, it is very clear that the traceability is going to be, first of all, an issue, and second, a complication. The fact is that as long as we will leave the sorting in the hands of the people, so we will have to do manual sorting. It is logical in our economic system that that needs to be done in a place where the labor cost is lower. Okay, but the moving back and forward of things will add a very high level of complication in the traceability of this. When we move to the used clothes markets, that's I would say that can we talk about something else than not about traceability, because that's going to be, I don't want to say practically impossible, but definitely complicated, because we are talking in the large majority of the cases of informal markets. And informal markets, for definition, they are not traceable at all. So my vision is that sorting of used garments need to be more mechanized and done automatically. And there are a lot of technologies popping up around to mainly already working, the exercises done in the north of Europe or in Spain, etc. And not only. So this is one direction. So the sorting can be more localized in both the markets itself and the recycling itself. But let's say that the recycling issues that we have, even though we have sorted, are much bigger than the sorting itself, because when we have decided that 80% of what we are doing is actually, how to say, it's blends of cotton and polyester, then we are starting with another problem, because we need to find a way to sort these things out, separate them before being able to recycle them or upcycle them. Pass me the term.
Thank you very much. And I think we will close now. Once again, thanks a lot for your valuable knowledge to share with us. Of course, our audience will have a lot of information, and hopefully in future we will have again some discussion sessions with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for inviting me.
My pleasure. And we will also share our next webinar that will be on 22nd December, and hopefully soon we will send the link to our audience. So once again, thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody. And
it's Italy, and good evening in Pakistan.
Okay, bye.
Bye.